There's a file buried deep in the Interstellar Diplomatic Archive, sealed, flagged, and stamped with a warning that translates roughly to, "Do not assign this mission to anyone who values their worldview." I read that warning. I accepted the mission anyway. My name is Verith, 9 of the Collective Observation Corps. I have documented the mating rituals of the Glenhari, who grow additional limbs when emotionally overwhelmed. I have cataloged the funeral songs of the Dusk Walkers, who mourn their dead by setting entire oceans on fire. I have sat inside the core of a dying star and measured the exact frequency at which matter gives up. I was not prepared for humans. No one is ever prepared for humans. The briefing said, observe 1 human combat unit in a controlled conflict environment. Record behavioral data. Return within 40 rotations. 40 rotations. I did not return for 2 years. And when I finally sat back down in the sterile white chair of the debriefing chamber and looked across the table at my superiors who were already pulling out their data slates and uncapping their styluses, I said only one thing before the formal report began. I said I should have refused. They laughed. I did not, because here is what the briefing failed to mention. Here is what no amount of academic literature or xenobiology coursework or centuries of collected alien observation could have told me before I stepped onto that transport vessel and shook hands with a human soldier for the first time. They're not the strongest species we have encountered. They're not the fastest, not the most intelligent by raw measure, not the most technologically advanced, not the most ancient, not the most feared in any of the 63 cataloged galactic conflicts that predated my birth. There's something else entirely, something the collective does not have a word for, something that after 2 years of watching them fight and grieve and laugh and refuse to die, I am still not sure language in any tongue across any star system is equipped to hold. This is my report. These are the things I saw, and if you are reading this and you have been assigned a similar mission, if you're sitting where I once sat, confident and prepared and slightly bored, put the file down. Walk away, because you will not come back the same. None of us do. The transport vessel smelled like recycled oxygen and machine grease and something else, something warm and faintly biological that Verith 9 could not identify and would later learn was called coffee. It hit the back of his olfactory sensors the moment the airlock sealed behind him, and he stood there for a full 3 seconds processing it, running it through his internal database, finding no match, filing it under unknown, pleasant, investigate later. He did not get to investigate later. He barely got to finish processing it, because the human was already there. She was leaning against the far wall of the docking corridor with her arms crossed over her chest, and her head tilted at the specific angle that Verith 9 would come to recognize over the next 2 years as the human expression for "I have evaluated you," and "the jury is still out." She was in full combat fatigues, dark green and worn at the knees, with a rifle slung across her back at an angle that suggested habit rather than readiness. Her hair was pulled back. Her jaw was set. Her eyes, a color that Verith 9's translator rendered as brown, the brown of old wood, the brown of something that has been here a long time and intends to stay, were running over him the same way his sensors were running over her. Cataloging, measuring. The difference was that she finished first. She pushed off the wall, extended a hand, and said, "Sergeant Mara Okafor, you must be the observer." Verith 9 looked at the hand. He had read about handshakes. The collective's cultural primer on human physical greeting customs ran to 47 pages, complete with diagrams and a cautionary appendix about grip pressure. He reached out and took her hand. She shook it once, firm, brief, the way someone shakes the hand of a stranger they're willing to work with but have not yet decided to trust. "Verith 9, he said, "Collective Observation Corps. I am here to document combat behavior." Yeah, they told us. She had already turned and was walking down the corridor. You get a bunk, you get access to all non-classified areas, and you do not get in the way. Those are the rules. Any questions? Verith 9 had 412 questions. He said no. She glanced back. Something in her face shifted, so fast he almost missed it, a flicker in the brown of her eyes, the corner of her mouth moving a fraction of a millimeter in a direction that might, in other contexts, be called amused. "Good," she said. "You'll fit in fine." You would not fit in for another 3 weeks. The unit was called Fire Team Casper. 7 soldiers. 1 medic who was also technically a soldier, but introduced herself as primarily a medic and secondarily someone who will absolutely shoot you if you reach for that morphine without authorization. Her name was Specialist Unipark, and she spoke at approximately the speed of a small natural disaster. And she was the first human to treat Verith, 9, with anything resembling friendliness, which she did by handing him a cup of coffee on his third day and watching his face with the careful attention of someone who has placed a very interesting bet on a very uncertain outcome. "Well," she said. Verith, 9 processed the liquid. It was bitter. It was hot. It left a sensation in his sensory nodes that he could only describe as argumentative. "It is," he said carefully, intense. Una beamed. "Right answer." The other 5 members of Fire Team Casper were as follows. Corporal Dev Torres, who was approximately the size of a small vehicle and had the conversational style of a man who had decided long ago that words were a finite resource, and he intended to spend them wisely. Private First Class Rosa Lima, who drew on everything. Her own hands, the walls of the transport, the tactical maps. With a small black marker she kept tucked behind her ear. Sergeant First Class Jamil Osei, who was Mara's second-in-command, and who had a habit of reading paper books in every quiet moment, which Verith 9 found endlessly fascinating because paper was extraordinarily rare and heavy and impractical, and yet here was this human carrying 3 of them across a combat zone. Private Marcus Webb, 19 years old, the youngest, who asked Verith 9 more questions in the first week than anyone in the collective had asked him in 15 years of service. And finally, Lieutenant Adriana Cross, the unit's commanding officer, who Verith 9 did not meet until day 5 because she was in meetings, and who, when he finally did meet her, looked at him for a long moment and said, "You look like you've never been scared in your life. My species does not experience fear in the way you will," she said, and walked away. He filed that exchange under unclear revisit. The Casper unit's primary assignment was a disputed zone in what the humans call the Outer Corridor, a region of contested planetary real estate where 3 different factions had been arguing, with bullets, about border definitions for approximately 11 years. Verith 9 had read the political briefings. He understood, in the abstract, what was at stake. He understood that humans fought wars over territory and resources and ideology, the same basic calculus that had driven conflict across 100 other species he had observed. What the briefings had not prepared him for was the texture of it. The first time the unit moved out, full kit, full weapons, boots hitting the red dust of the corridor's primary landmass in a rhythm that Verith 9 had to consciously resist sinking to, he was struck not by the danger or the tension, but by how ordinary it felt. They moved through it the way he moved through administrative corridors back at the collective. Not carelessly, but as though the world they were moving through, with its broken buildings and distant smoke and the specific quality of silence that meant the absence of what should be there, was simply the world. The place they lived, the thing they had adapted to. Dev Torres walk point. He moved like a man made of angles, efficient and clean, his rifle up at the level that suggested it was an extension of his body rather than a thing he was carrying. Rosa Lima was behind him, and Verith 9 noticed that her drawing marker was still behind her ear even here, which he found so purely human that it almost knocked him sideways. Mara moved center. She didn't talk on patrol. Something happened to her face when the unit moved out, a settling, a closing down, as though she was turning a dial from one frequency to another. The person who had shaken his hand in the docking bay was still in there somewhere. But she had put her away, folded her up neat, tucked her somewhere safe for later. Verith 9 walked beside Una, who was the only one who talked to him during movement. "First patrol?" she asked, not looking at him, eyes tracking the broken skyline. "First human combat observation," he said. "Nervous? My species does not. I know. You don't get nervous." She was quiet for a moment. "We get nervous. All of us. Every single time." She paused. "Dev doesn't look it. None of them look it. But I've been patching these people up for 3 years, and I can tell. There's a thing that happens to the hands. Not shaking. More like getting very still. Like they're trying to make their body believe it's a rock." Verith 9 looked at Dev's hands on his rifle. "Very still. Why do they do it?" he asked. "Continue to go out if they are experiencing. Because someone has to." She said it the way a person states a mathematical fact. No emphases. No drama. Simple like gravity. And they'd rather it be them than someone who doesn't know what they're doing. He filed that under important. Do not lose this. He almost lost a lot of things in the first contact. It came on day 12. A building, a stairwell, a door that should have been empty and was not. Verith 9 was in the rear of the formation when the shooting started, and he experienced something that his species' medical literature called acute sensory overwhelm, and that every human in the unit later referred to with casual precision as getting their bell rung. The sound was enormous. Not just loud, enormous, like it had mass, like it was occupying the same space he was and was not planning to move. His visual sensors flooded. His translation matrix stuttered. He dropped to one knee behind a broken wall and did something he had never in 15 years of field observation done before. He froze. He was still frozen when Mara appeared beside him. She did not appear alarmed by his condition. She looked at him the way Yuna had looked at him the first morning with the coffee, evaluating an outcome, updating a prediction. Then she put her hand on his shoulder, just briefly, just 1 second of contact, and said, "Stay here. Don't move. We'll be back." Then she was gone, back into the noise. From behind the wall, Verith 9 heard things. The specific pattern of how the unit communicated under fire, short, compressed, the consonants cut off because there wasn't time for full words. He heard Torres call out positions in a voice that had gone flat and technical, no emotional register at all. He heard Rosa Lima swear, once, in a language his translator identified as her secondary dialect. He heard Jamil O say, who was usually so quiet, bark something that made 2 other voices change position immediately. He heard a silence that lasted 4 seconds and felt like 40 years. Then he heard Mara's voice, and the specific quality of it told him, even before the words resolved, that it was over. Clear. Sound off. 7 voices. 7. He counted them twice. He sat behind that wall for another 30 seconds after they called him out. Not because he was afraid. His species did not technically experience fear in the way, but because something was happening in his processing matrix that he did not have a word for. Something that felt, if he was being precise, like the moment after you have been very close to an edge and have stepped back and are now standing on solid ground, and the solid ground feels different than it did before. More solid, more precious, more thin. When he came out from behind the wall, Mara looked at him. He thought she would say something clinical, an assessment, a judgment. She said, "Good. You stayed put." A lot of first-timers don't. That was it. He filed it under. Highest priority. Do not understand yet. Return to this. The debrief that night was in a ruined building that still had most of a roof. Rosa drew on a section of wall while they talked. Verith 9 never found out what she was drawing. She painted over it before he could get close enough. Dev Torres ate from a ration pack with the committed focus of a man who has decided eating is the most important thing that has ever happened. Jamil read. Marcus Webb sat next to Verith 9 and asked him in the particular way that 19-year-olds ask questions. Openly, with no agenda, with a genuine and slightly unsettling belief that the person next to them has answers. What it was like to observe species that weren't human. Interesting, Verith 9 said. Marcus waited. He was good at waiting for more, this young one. Interesting, Verith 9 said again, and then, because Marcus kept waiting, but not like this. Like what? Verith 9 looked around the room. At the 7 people who had gone into that building today and come back out of it and were now sitting in a ruined room eating rations and reading books and drawing on walls. At the absolute normalcy they had constructed around an event that had, from the outside, looked like the end of everything. Like this, he said, because he did not have a better word yet. He was still looking for the word 2 years later. He never fully found it. But he came close. He came very close. Verith 9 had observed 41 species across 6 decades of fieldwork. He had watched the Murin dissolve themselves into collective consciousness during moments of crisis, 800 individual beings becoming one organism to solve a problem. Then, splitting back apart like nothing had happened, like splitting was easy, like individuality was just a coat you took off in warm weather. He had documented the Vresi, who communicated exclusively through bioluminescence, and had no concept of privacy because their emotional state was always visible, always glowing, always telling anyone with insight exactly what they were feeling. He had spent 3 years with the Keth, who had evolved past warfare, so completely that they no longer had the neurological architecture to understand it, who looked at a weapon the way someone might look at a color they could not see. None of them had prepared him for Week 3. Week 3 was when Private First Class Rosa Lima got shot. It was not a fatal wound. Verith 9 understood this quickly, because Yuna moved with the specific speed of someone who has done this before, and is not panicking because panic is a luxury, and she had long since decided she could not afford luxuries in the field. Rosa was down in the dust, and Yuna was already there, already working, already talking to Rosa in a low voice that was simultaneously instruction and comfort, and the specific kind of professional reassurance that Varith 9 had observed across multiple species and recognized as the verbal equivalent of here. I have this. You're allowed to stop holding yourself together for one moment. Rosa held herself together anyway. That was the first thing. The second thing was Torres. Dev Torres had not, in the 3 weeks Varith 9 had observed him, made a sound that could be categorized as emotional. He was operational. He was steady. He was the human equivalent of load-bearing architecture, the thing that held the weight so nothing else had to. Varith 9 had begun to wonder, in the detached academic way that felt increasingly wrong the longer he spent with this unit, whether Torres was unusual among humans or whether the combat environment simply required the suppression of all non-functional emotional expression. When Rosa went down, Torres turned. Just for a second. 1 second, sub-second, even too fast to document cleanly on anything but Varith 9's internal recording. Torres turned and looked at Rosa, and his face did something that Varith 9 would spend the next week trying to accurately describe in his field notes and ultimately render as all the things he did not permit himself in the field compressed into one instant and visible only because they were too large for even him to hold back entirely. Then it was gone. Locked. Filed. He turned back to covering their exit. Varith 9 noted it under. Dev Torres, complexity confirmed, do not project simplicity onto efficient people. Rosa was back on her feet in 4 days. This was itself a data point that Varith 9 spent considerable time processing. He had observed species with superior biological regeneration. The Luchek, whose cellular repair mechanisms made Yuna's medical kit look like a child's toy, but Rosa's recovery was not biological. Or not only biological. It was something else that Varith 9 did not have a classification for, something that operated in the space between what the body could do and what the person demanded it do, some negotiation between flesh and, well, that ended with Rosa Lima walking back into the briefing room on day 4, still slightly pale, marker back behind her ear, and saying to the room at large, "Miss me?" Marcus Webb cheered. It was slightly too loud for the space and slightly too young for the context, and exactly right for both. Mara looked at Rosa for a long moment. Then she said, "Don't do that again." "Wasn't my first choice either, Sarge." "A beat." "Good," Mara said. She picked up the briefing tablet. "Okay, pay attention." Varith 9 watched this. He watched the way the room settled back into operational mode with Rosa in it. The way the weight that had been in the air for 4 days, he had not named it as weight at the time, he named it retrospectively, simply lifted the way Torres unfolded slightly from whatever configuration he had been holding himself in since the shooting. He watched Jamil close his book and actually put it down rather than marking his page, as if reading could wait, as if the thing happening in this room was more worth attending to than anything written in any of the 3 books he carried. He filed it under cohesion, not strategic, something else, find the word. The word he was looking for was love. He would not find it for another 2 months. The mission profile changed in week 5. Varith 9 had not been included in the strategic briefings. He was an observer, not a participant, and the lieutenant had been clear about the limits of his access. But he understood from context and from the shift in the unit's posture that what was coming was larger than anything they had done so far. The outer corridor conflict had been grinding toward a specific flashpoint for years, and the flashpoint was approaching, and Fireteam Casper was going to be inside it. He requested an audience with Lieutenant Cross. She received him in the command vehicle, which smelled like coffee and old maps and the specific plastic of military-grade equipment run well past its intended lifespan. She was looking at something on a screen when he came in and did not stop looking at it when she spoke. "What do you need, Varith?" She had started calling him Varith somewhere in week 2. He had not asked her to. It had simply happened the way many things with humans happened, organically, without announcement, already established by the time he noticed it. "I have a question," he said, "about what is coming. I can't share operational details, not operational, behavioral." He paused, organizing the question the way he had been organizing it for 3 days. "I have been observing combat species for 60 years. I have documented conflict across 6 dozen civilizations. In every case without exception, there's a threshold, a point at which the biological drive for survival overrides the strategic objective. Every species I have studied reaches this threshold. They calculate the cost. They choose preservation. He looked at her profile. Where is your threshold? Cross stopped looking at the screen. She turned to face him, and something in her expression was doing something complicated. Not offense, not amusement, not the evaluative look she had given him at their first meeting. Something that contained, he would later think, a kind of sadness that was not sad, a weight that was not heavy because she was accustomed to carrying it. You're asking me when we cut and run, she said. I am asking when survival instinct overrides mission commitment. She looked at him for a long moment. We don't have a threshold, she said. He waited for qualification, for elaboration, for the asterisk. None came. You're saying that humans do not. I'm saying my people don't. She turned back to the screen. Maybe other humans do. Mine don't. And it's not because they're not scared or because they don't know what dying costs. They know better than anyone. It's because she stopped, started again, because they decided something, each of them, before they put on that uniform. They decided that some things matter more than their own continued existence. And once a person decides that, the calculation changes. The threshold moves. It moves to a place where another pause. She shook her head. I don't know how to explain it to someone who hasn't decided it. Vareth. Nine looked at her. Try, he said. She looked at him again. Something shifted in her face. The same flicker he had seen in Mara's eyes on the first day. The micro-expression his translation matrix kept rendering as updating estimate. It's like this, she said. You love something. You love it more than you love yourself. And then you stop being afraid of dying for it, because losing it would already be a kind of death. So the math changes. You're not risking your life for the mission. You're protecting the thing that makes your life mean something. She looked back at the screen. That's all it is. That's the whole secret. Vareth. Nine sat with that for a moment. That is not a strategic calculation, he said. No, she agreed. It's not. He filed it under human combat psychology, foundational. This is the variable I was missing. This changes all prior models. The next 2 weeks before the operation were, paradoxically, the most ordinary. He played cards with Marcus Webb and lost badly every time because Marcus had a tell-reading ability that Vareth 9 sensors could not replicate because it operated on intuition rather than data. He listened to Jamil Osei read aloud from one of his paper books. Not to the group, just to himself, but quietly enough that anyone nearby could hear if they wanted to, which Vareth 9 decided was a kind of invitation, a kept open door. He watched Rosa Lima draw on a new section of wall and, finally, for the first time, saw what she drew. Not patterns, not abstract shapes, but people. Specific people, rendered with a few strokes so economical they should not have worked and did anyway. She drew Dev Torres's profile. She drew Una mid-reach, arm extended, the way she looked when she was working. She drew Mara from behind, rifle down, looking at something outside the frame. Who is that for? Vareth. 9 asked her. Rosa looked at the drawing of Mara. I don't know, she said. For me, I guess. For later. She uncapped the marker, recapped it. For if I need to remember what they looked like. He did not ask her to clarify what circumstances would require such remembering. She did not offer. He filed it under Rosa Lima, preparing, not for death, I think, for grief. Humans prepare for grief the way other species prepare for logistics. He thought about that for a long time. He thought about whether his species prepared for grief, or simply encountered it, or whether the collective communal consciousness absorbed individual loss so thoroughly that grief never had the specific, personal, sharp-edged quality it seemed to have for humans. Whether his people's grief was more like weather, and human grief was more like a wound, and whether a wound was not, in fact, more honest. He did not put that in the official field notes. He put in the personal file he had quietly started keeping, the one that was not for the collective's archive, but for himself, the one he did not have authorization for and did not intend to share. He called the file Things the Briefing Forgot to Mention. It was already 40 pages long. The night before the operation, he found Mara sitting outside on the cracked concrete step of the building they were using as a staging area. Not doing anything. Just sitting, looking at the sky, which was the red-tinted dark of the corridor's night cycle, which Vareth 9's internal processing had categorized as aesthetically unusual, but not remarkable, and which he was slowly reclassifying as beautiful, in the particular way that things are beautiful when they exist above danger. He sat down next to her. She didn't acknowledge him, but she didn't tell him to leave. They sat in silence for a while. He had learned that humans had two kinds of silence: the silence that wanted to be filled and the silence that was itself the conversation. This was the second kind. Eventually, Mara said, "You're keeping a second file." He looked at her. "You don't have to confirm it," she said. "I just want you to know, whatever you write in it, write it accurate. Don't make us heroes. Don't make us tragic. Write us like what we are." "What are you?" he asked. She looked at the red sky. "People doing a job," she said. "A hard job we chose. That's all." He thought about what Lieutenant Cross had said. The thing that makes your life mean something. He thought about Torres and his lock face and Rosa and her drawings and Marcus and his questions and Yuna and her coffee and Jamil and his books. "I don't think that is all," he said carefully. Mara was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said. "I guess it's not." She stood up, brushed dust from her fatigues. She looked at him one more time, and the look on her face was something he was only beginning to learn how to read. The specific human expression that contains simultaneously exhaustion and resolve and the kind of warmth that people with hard jobs extend to each other, not because they're soft, but because they understand that the job is long and the nights are cold and there's no good reason not to. "Get some sleep, Verith," she said. "I do not sleep in the human sense, I know." She was already going inside. "Do whatever it is you do instead." He sat on the step for another hour. He watched the red sky. He added 11 more pages to the file he was not supposed to be keeping. Then he went inside, and he prepared in whatever way he was able for what was coming. The operation began at 0400 in the dark of the corridors pre-dawn, which meant the sky was not black but not red yet, caught between those two states in the particular shade of dark blue that Verith 9's color processing rendered his transition, and that he had, over the past weeks, begun to think of simply as the Casper hour, because this was when they moved, this was their time, this was when Fireteam Casper was most itself. He was not supposed to be there. He was very clear on this point. Observer status did not include active operational participation. He had a perimeter assignment, a safe position from which to document the action, and he had been briefed on it thoroughly, and he had nodded at the appropriate moments, and then at 0345 as the unit staged and checked gear and did the things they did before they went into the place they were going into, he had looked at them and known with the absolute clarity of something that could not be argued with, that he was not going to watch this from a safe distance. He did not examine the reasoning. He simply fell into formation. Nobody said anything. Marcus Webb glanced at him, quick, sidelong, and then glanced away. Yuna passed him and tapped twice on his left arm, which he had come to recognize as her equivalent of a full paragraph of words. Mara was in front and did not turn, but the slight shift in her shoulders as he fell and told him she had registered it. They moved out. The objective was a relay station in a collapsed industrial complex that had been built for something else, something civilian, something that had made goods or processed materials or served some ordinary pre-war function that the war had entirely overwritten. Now, it was a tactically significant point in a contested grid, and 3 different armed factions wanted it. And Fireteam Casper's job was to hold it for 60 minutes until a larger force arrived to permanently secure it. 60 minutes. Verith 9 had been briefed on the 60 minutes. It had seemed like a manageable number. He had used 60 minutes in the past to compose report sections, eat meals, conduct interviews with cooperative alien officials in climate-controlled rooms. 60 minutes was a different thing entirely at ground level. They reached the station without contact, which Lieutenant Cross had said was either very good or very bad, and she wasn't sure which. The complex was huge and broken, walls missing in sections, floors collapsed in others, the industrial machinery left behind arranged like the bones of something enormous that had died mid-function. Torres swept the primary space with his rifle and hand-signaled clear, and the unit distributed through the positions they had already mapped without being told twice, because they had gone over this in the briefing room 3 times, because they knew their jobs, because they had done this before in other places with other objectives, and the specific variables changed, but the core of the thing remained constant. Find your ground, hold it, come home. Verith 9 took a position beside Yuna in a second-floor alcove that gave a sight line down to the main floor and up to the broken ceiling where the sky was beginning its transition from dark blue to the first thin edge of red. Yuna had her kit open. She was not doing anything with it. Just open, ready, the instruments arranged in the order she would reach for them. "How long have you been a medic?" Verith 9 asked very quietly. 8 years, she said, equally quiet. "Is it difficult? Sustaining the concentration in these conditions?" "Yeah." She did not elaborate. How do you manage it? Yuna looked at him. Then she looked back at the main floor below, at Jamil and Torres and Rosa taking their positions, at Mara moving through the space like she was reading a language the building was speaking. I pretend I'm just good at my job, she said, for about 3 seconds. Then that wears off, and I remember what's actually happening, and then I think about the next thing I have to do, just the next thing, one thing, and I do that, and then I think of the next one. She paused, and you just keep doing that. Next thing, next thing, next thing, until it's over. And when it is over, a longer pause. Then you feel it. Everything you didn't let yourself feel while you were doing next thing, next thing, next thing. You feel all of it. It's not fun, she agreed before he finished. But it cleans out, like a system reboot. She tilted her head slightly. Your species doesn't feel things in sequence like that. We process emotionally in. He stopped. I'm beginning to think I do not know as much about my own species as I assumed. She smiled. Quickly. Then it was gone, and her face was back in the expression he had learned to call professional. Not cold, not unreachable, just aimed at the job. Stay low, she said. Stay behind me. If something goes wrong, do the next thing, he said. She looked at him. Updated estimate. Yeah, she said. Exactly that. They came from the west side of the complex, at 0511. Not one faction. 2. Verith. 9 had not processed the strategic implications of this before it was already happening. Before the sound came through the walls, and Torres had moved from his position, and Mara's voice was in the comms cutting the information down to its minimum viable form, and the unit was doing a thing he had no word for, a thing that he would try, in the field notes he wrote afterward, to describe as fluid collective reconfiguration under fire, though he knew as he wrote it that the phrase was too cold and too mechanical for what he had actually seen. What he had actually seen was this: 7 people, without discussion, without hesitation, moving to cover each other's gaps as the situation changed, as the thing they had planned for became a different thing, and then became a third thing, each person tracking not just their own position, but the positions of everyone around them, adjusting, filling, rotating, an organism with 7 bodies and one operational mind that had no central processor, just trust, just the specific trust that comes from knowing the people beside you and being known by them, from having spent enough time together in enough hard places that communication had compressed to below the threshold of language. Torres called out a position. Jamil was already there. Rosa needed cover to move. Dev was already covering. Mara needed a sight line she didn't have. Marcus moved without being asked. Verith. 9 watched all of this from the alcove, and his internal recording systems were running at full capacity, capturing everything, and somewhere in his processing matrix a new category was forming. Not analysis, not data, not documentation. Something closer to what the word astonished means, if you allow that word to reach past surprise into a more fundamental state. The state of someone whose model of the world has just been revealed as too small. Then, Rosa took a second hit. Verith. 9 moved before he processed the decision to move. This was not in his operational profile. This was not observer behavior. This was something else. Something that had been building for 6 weeks without his full awareness. Something that had been installed in him by 47 shared meals and 7 card games and 11 pages of unauthorized field notes and the specific weight of a unit silence on the night before an operation. Something that, when the Rosa-shaped gap appeared in the coverage pattern, resolved into motion without consulting him first. He was not a soldier. He had no weapon. He had no training. He had good cover from the alcove to the pillar where Rosa had gone down, because he had spent 6 weeks watching how this unit moved through spaces, and he had, without intending to, learn the geometry of their environment, the way you learn the geometry of a house you live in. Not memorized, just known. He reached her. Yuna was 10 seconds behind him. Rosa was conscious. She looked at Verith. 9 crouched beside her with an expression his translation matrix could not fully parse: surprise and pain and something else, something that landed in his processing center not as data, but as warmth, as a thing received rather than documented. Well, Rosa said, voice tight with the specific effort of maintaining speech through pain. Didn't expect you. Do not talk, he said, which was something he had heard Yuna say many times, and which seemed like correct instruction. You're supposed to be observing. I am. He looked at the entry point of the injury, cataloged what he could, prepared to relay at the moment Yuna arrived. I'm observing very closely. Rosa's face did the thing. The almost smile, The flicker of something warm in the brown of her eyes, the same thing Mara had done at the docking bay, the same thing the whole unit did when the world was hard and they chose deliberately and consciously to not let it have the full meaning it was reaching for. Then Una was there, and Verith, 9 moved back, and the next 11 minutes were something that he did not put in the official report, but kept in a private file in a section he labeled with simply, this. They held the position. 63 minutes. 3 minutes over. The larger force arrived with the particular sound of heavy vehicle engines and the specific quality of communication that meant friendly, do not shoot, we are the thing you were waiting for. Verith, 9 sat on the broken floor of the industrial complex's upper level and looked at the sky through the gap in the ceiling, which was now fully red, the corridor's dawn complete, the transition finished. He was running post-event system checks. He was cataloging the sensory data from the operation. He was doing the things observers did after the thing they were observing was over. He was also, he noticed, shaking, not visibly. His species' physiological expression of stress was internal, a vibration in his processing matrix rather than his physical form, but present, real, the kind of thing that would, in his official bioreport, be classified as a standard elevated stress response and filed under routine, expected, resolved. He was not sure it was resolved. Marcus Webb dropped down beside him. He had a ration pack, which he was already eating because 19 and metabolically demanding were a combination that did not care about emotional processing windows. You okay? Marcus asked, mouth partially full, not apologizing for this. I'm conducting a post-operation, yeah, I know. Marcus chewed. Are you okay? Verith, 9 looked at him. At the 19 years of him, the openness, the complete and slightly unsettling willingness to ask what he actually wanted to know rather than what was socially expected. I do not know yet, Verith, 9 said. Marcus nodded, as though this was a completely acceptable answer. Maybe among 19-year-olds it was. Maybe among humans in general. Maybe the collective's expectation that all states be classified and resolved was the outlier, the unusual thing, the one with the misaligned data. Next thing, Verith, 9 said. Marcus looked at him, grinned, sudden, young, real. Yeah, next thing. They sat there together while the red sky did what it did, holding its color a little longer than seemed reasonable before the blue came back in to take it. Below them, the unit was doing the post-operation things, gear check, status report, the structured unwinding that Verith 9 had observed 12 times now, and was beginning to understand as ritual, as the way humans put the event behind them without pretending it hadn't happened. He added the whole morning to the private file. He added a note at the bottom that said, I am no longer certain I am observing. I am not certain I have been only observing for some time. Then, he added, I do not think this is a problem. I think it might be the point. He was supposed to leave at the 40 rotation mark. The transport was scheduled. The collective's coordination office had sent 3 separate confirmation messages, each one a little more pointed than the last. The bureaucratic equivalent of a throat cleared with increasing urgency. His official observation period was complete. His data packages were compiled. His preliminary report was drafted. Everything was in order. Everything said go. Verith 9 stood at the transport dock with his equipment case and his official report and his very thoroughly compiled data packages, and he looked at the vessel that was going to take him back to the collective sterile corridors and his own familiar workspace and the coffee that he had finally sourced from an import requisition and that tasted like a pale and disappointed ghost of the thing Una had handed him on day 3. He stood there for a long time. Then he went back. He did not send a message ahead. He did not file a request for extended observation. He simply showed up at the unit's staging area with his equipment case, and his unofficial expression, which his translation matrix was slowly learning to identify in itself. The expression that meant I have made a decision, and I'm not entirely certain it is the correct one, and I'm not going to examine it too closely in case it is not. Mara saw him first. She was outside, as she was most early mornings, running a maintenance check on her rifle with the focused patience of someone who treats equipment as an extension of responsibility. She looked up. She looked at the case. She looked at him. Thought you were leaving, she said. I was. She waited. I am extending my observation period, he said. Informally. Informally. The collective has not approved the extension. Mara looked at him for a moment in the particular way that contained more than it showed. Then she stood, slung the rifle, and said, Una made a new batch. It's inside. He followed her. Una handed him a cup without being asked. The cup was chipped on one side, the same cup he was almost certain that she had handed him on day 3 kept specifically a continuity he did not know how to ask about, and did not need to because the fact of it was already saying everything. He took a sip. It was hot. It was bitter. It was argumentative. It tasted like home. He filed that under. Important. Examine later. May require significant revision of several prior assumptions. The next 18 months were not a continuous operation. They were the things between operations, the texture of a unit's life at rest, which Verith 9 came to understand was as important to document as the firefights. Maybe more important because the firefights were the event and the days between were the substance, the actual material of what these people were, what they chose to be when the external pressure was not making the choice for them. Torres, in the spaces between, was a person who cooked. He cooked with the same focused efficiency he brought to everything else, which meant the food was very good and very precisely seasoned, and he refused to discuss the process or accept compliments about it, which once described as the most Dev thing Dev has ever done, and he does it twice a week. Rosa Limadrio. She had moved from walls to small notebooks, 3 of them now, carried in the same inner pocket as her rifle cleaning kit, which said something about their relative importance that she never articulated and never had to. She had started drawing Verith 9. He had discovered this accidentally, glimpsing a page she had not intended to show, a series of studies, him from behind, him looking up at the sky, him listening to something with the specific tilt of his head that humans seemed to find unusual and she had apparently found interesting. He did not mention it. She did not offer. It sat between them, warm and unspoken, like a lot of the things between them that mattered. Jamil Osei finished one of his paper books and gave it to Verith 9. Just handed it to him one afternoon. No preamble, no explanation. The book was worn at the spine, and the cover had a small drawing in the corner that Verith 9 recognized, after a moment, as Rose's work. She had marked Jamil's books for him, small drawings in each corner, his own private library system. The book was a collection of human poetry, which Verith 9's translation matrix processed with something between confusion and delight because poetry, he was discovering, operated specifically in the gap between what words meant and what they felt like, the space his translation software was least equipped to navigate, which meant reading it was like solving a problem with insufficient tools, which meant every successfully understood poem was a small victory, which meant he read the whole book twice. He gave it back to Jamil with a specific corner turned down. Jamil looked at the page, read the poem that was there, looked up, did not say anything. Verith 9 did not say anything either. He was learning, often better that way. Marcus Webb, over the course of 18 months, grew up. Not dramatically. Not in the way of the stories humans told about war and transformation, not a narrative arc with a clear before and after. More like the way wood changes, slowly, under pressure, becoming something denser and more certain without losing the essential material of what it had been. He asked Verith 9 fewer questions. Not because the curiosity had left him. It had not. It never did. Verith 9 suspected it would not in any of the futures Marcus would inhabit, but because some of the space that questions had occupied was now filled with other things. His own conclusions. His own settled knowledge. The things you know because you have been in enough situations to have learned them from the inside rather than by asking someone. Verith 9 missed the question sometimes. He asked some of his own. The mission that almost broke everything happened in the 14th month. It was a retrieval. Another unit, 3 soldiers separated and pinned down in a contested position 12 kilometers from the nearest friendly outpost. Fireteam Casper volunteered. The word volunteered is the one that appeared in the official record, and it was accurate, and it was also, Verith 9 had by now learned, almost a meaningless distinction because volunteered implied a choice between this and not this, and for the people in this unit, there was frequently only this. They went. The retrieval worked. They brought all 3 soldiers out. But the extraction was not clean, and the 12 kilometers back were the hardest 12 kilometers Verith 9 had documented in 2 years of walking beside humans in hard places, and at the end of them, back inside the wire, the exfil vehicles pulling in the extracted soldiers handed off to medical. Something happened to Mara? She sat down. Not a controlled, deliberate sitting. She sat down the way a building sits down when a foundational element fails. Not a fall, but a settlement, a sudden acknowledgement of gravity that had been deferred too long. She sat in the dust beside the vehicle with her rifle across her knees, and she put her face in her hands. The unit stood around her, not crowding, not touching, not speaking. Just there, arranged around her the way humans arrange themselves around the things that mattered, the same way they had arranged themselves in every briefing room and ruined building and cracked concrete staging area, except without the structure and without the operational purpose. Just simply there because she was there because she was theirs. Torres sat down next to her. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Rosa crouched in front of her and drew nothing, just crouched there. Una checked everyone's hands and faces in the way she always checked, cataloging small wounds, updating her mental ledger of who needed what. She got to Mara and paused and did not check her the way she checked the others. Just looked at her for a moment with the expression that contained the complete history of their specific version of this specific relationship, all the operations and all the mending and all the mornings with coffee. Mara took her face out of her hands. She looked at Torres. She looked at the group. Her eyes were dry, or if they had not been, they were now. Whatever the moment had required, she had given it and was now done giving it. 14 kilometers, she said. I miscounted before. Yeah, Torres said. That's a lot. Yep. She looked up at the sky. Then she stood, and the unit settled back into itself around her, the way water settles after stone, closing over smooth, not pretending the stone wasn't there, just being water again because that was what was needed. Verith. 9 had written many things in his private file. He had written about courage and cohesion and the specific gravity of human commitment. He had written about the threshold that Lieutenant Cross said did not exist and the love that he had finally found the word for. He had written about next thing and what cost to keep choosing it. He wrote about this moment too. He wrote at length. He wrote, I have observed grief in 41 species. Some perform it, some suppress it, some distribute it through collective consciousness until the individual weight becomes bearable. I have not, before today, observed it shared, not handed off, not absorbed, shared, held together, all at once, by people who are each holding their own grief while making space for another's. And then, I think this might be the thing I have been trying to name for 2 years. Not courage, not the absence of fear, not the strategic calculation of acceptable loss. This, the willingness to hold someone else's weight while still carrying your own. The decision, made not once, but continuously, every day, every operation, every morning with coffee, to be the kind of person the people beside you can sit down in front of. He stopped writing. He looked at the unit. He thought about his own people, about the collective's communal consciousness and its shared cognition and the elegant efficiency of distributed emotional processing. He thought about what they did not have, the specific weight of this, the very heavy, very real, very irreplaceable weight of choosing to be here for these particular people in this particular moment, because you know them, because they are yours, because there is no algorithm that can substitute for the accumulated trust of 14 months of hard ground. He thought, the collective will not understand my report. He thought, I'm going to write it anyway. The day he left, actually left with the transport scheduled and the authorization filed, and Mara accompanying him to the dock this time instead of the first time's waiting posture and studied evaluation. Lieutenant Cross found him in the corridor outside the staging area. She handed him something. A data chip. Small. Unmarked. What is this? He asked. Operational records. The ones that didn't make the official report. She looked at him steadily. For the file you're keeping. He looked at the chip. You knew about it, he said. From about week 2. She almost smiled. Almost. I've been adding to it. He closed his fingers around the chip and found that he did not have a response ready, which was itself information. That this person, in the last 2 years, had become one of the very small number of entities across 6 decades of field work that could take him briefly outside his ability to respond. Write it well, she said. Write it honest. Mara asked me the same thing, he said. Mara usually asks the right things. She moved past him, paused. Thank you for not leaving when you were supposed to. He turned to look at her back. Thank you, he said, for the opposite. She walked away without answering. He filed that under the only category that accurately held it, the one he had added in month 4, and which had grown to accommodate more than he had expected. What humans do instead of explaining. The docking bay smelled like recycled oxygen and machine grease and coffee. The coffee this time was Una's. She had brought a sealed thermos that she pressed into his hands with both of hers and said, for the trip, don't let it cool. It gets mean when it's cool. Then she hugged him, which was something he had been hugged by humans 17 times over the course of 2 years, and which remained Each time, something his sensory processing experienced as more information than it could fully organize in the moment, a surplus of warmth that he was never quite ready for, and which he was deeply grateful for every single time. Torres shook his hand. The grip was exactly what it had been on day 3, when Vareth 9 had tried to greet him and Torres had looked at the extended hand, and then back at him, evaluating, then shook it once brief, the way someone shakes a hand when they have decided you can be trusted. The same grip now, only completely different. Rosa gave him a notebook, one of the small ones. He opened it. The pages were full of the drawings she had done of him over 18 months. Him from every angle, him in every weather, him listening and watching and sitting and standing, the whole observable shape of who he had been the time he had been there, rendered in ink by someone who had looked at him and found him worth looking at. He could not speak for a moment. For the report, Rosa said, not looking at him, recapping the marker. In case words aren't enough. Marcus Webb last walked up to him and offered his hand. Vareth 9 took it. Marcus held it a beat longer than was strictly necessary. Come back, Marcus said. Not visit. Not if you're ever in the area. Come back. Vareth 9 looked at him. At the almost 20 years of him, and the person those 20 years were becoming. I will, he said. And he meant it. He presented his official report to the collective's Observation Review Board 6 weeks after his return. It was thorough. It was accurate. It was one of the most comprehensive xenobehavioral documents on human combat psychology in the collective's archive, and the review board received it with appropriate professional appreciation and several detailed questions that he answered precisely and without editorializing. Then, they asked him the standard closing question. Describe the primary observable characteristic of your study species that distinguishes them most significantly from other documented sentient species. He had been thinking about this answer for 2 years. He had written multiple drafts of it in a private file. He had tried and rejected 30 different framings: biological, psychological, strategic, philosophical. He said, they choose each other. The board waited for elaboration. Not a strategy, he said. Not because it is efficient, or because there is biological incentive, or because the collective benefit outweighs individual risk. They choose each other because they have decided to. Because they have looked at the people beside them, in the full knowledge of what those people cost, what caring for them costs, what losing them will cost, and chosen to care anyway. Not in spite of the cost. Understanding the cost completely. He paused. They call this by many words. Loyalty, love, duty, brotherhood. The word changes with the context and the speaker. The thing being named does not change. He looked at the board, at the data slates, and styluses, and the clean surfaces and the efficient space. The thing being named, he said, is what makes them what they are, and it is, of all the variables I documented, the one that most consistently overrides all other predicted behavioral outcomes, including survival, including self-interest, including the fundamental calculus of loss that every other documented species, without exception, ultimately defers to. He stood up. I should have refused this assignment, he said. The briefing recommended it. The warning in the archive file recommended it. I recommend it now to anyone assigned after me. He gathered his report materials. He picked up the notebook Rosa had given him, which he had brought into the room as a data reference, and which contained all the things that were not in the official report. I recommend it, he said, at the door, because you will not come back the same, and the collective measures the same as continuity, as correct functioning, as the absence of contamination. He held the notebook a little tighter. But I came back changed, and I have been in this work for 60 years, and it is the first time in 60 years that I came back with more than I left with. He left. In the corridor outside, he found a memo from the collective's coordination office. His next assignment, already scheduled, a new species, a new conflict zone, a new observation window. He filed the memo. He would go. He was an observer. It was his work. But first he sent a message back to the outer corridor. Short. He had learned from humans that the important things did not require length. He wrote, still observing. The coffee at the collective is unacceptable. Tell Yuna. 3 hours later, a response came back in Mara's text register, clipped and plain and warm in exactly the proportion she was always warm. Visible to those who knew how to look, invisible to those who did not. She says you'll have to come get some yourself. He read it twice. He filed it in the private archive, in a section he had never shown anyone and never intended to, in the very last page of the longest document he had ever produced in 60 years of observation work. He labeled the page Home. Then, he packed for the next assignment. And he took the notebook with him,